Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today as a Ravens fan to be joined by none other than Mr. Gerry Sandusky himself, the longtime radio play-by-play voice of the Baltimore Ravens. He's also the sports director at WBAL TV, the son of longtime NFL coach, Super Bowl V champion John Sandusky. So great to see you, Gerry. Thanks you so much for coming on with me today.
Billy, a pleasure to join you and really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, for sure. As you always say, the hay's in the barn. So let's get right to it. I wanted to ask you, what have you been up to last couple of days, last couple of weeks, really, because the NFL season is finally behind us. How are you doing? What's kind of the off season looking like for you?
So the first couple of days after the season, honestly, I couldn't tell you what I was doing. I was kind of catatonic. It was just the whole you stop and you feel like, wow, I didn't realize I was so tired. And then you start to kind of get your legs back under you. And the first thing you do after the season is pull all of your notes together because things are going to change really fast in the next couple of weeks. You're going to have free agency, and then it's the draft, and it's mini camp, and all of a sudden it starts again. So I use this time to kind of go back through the season, clean up all my notes, make sure I have all my notes really in an organized fashion for every single player who's still on the roster, as well as the team notes. And then you start to track the changes. The changes in the coaching staff. The changes are significant in terms of the coaching staff with you've lost three of the key members of the defensive staff. You just lost a member of the offensive staff, and so you start to get a feel for all right, the evolution of this team, and the change will start to pick up here in the next couple of weeks. You're going to have the franchise tag window will close. You kind of expect to see Justin Madubuike get tagged there, and then it's full bore onto the draft, and then before you know, once you have your rookie class, then it's mini camp, and then veteran mini camp, and then it's training camp, and it all starts all over again.
I have to ask you, how do you do it? I mean, you're the sports director at WBAL. You call Ravens games. I mean, how do you manage it during the course of an NFL season? I'm sure it's got to be crazy, but fun as well.
So, it's something I actually learned in college. And it's a technique that I learned in college that, here I am 4 decades later, I still use it to this day. It's called the iceberg technique. And if you think about an iceberg, you see a little bit above the water, but all of the body of the iceberg is below the water. So when you think about preparing for a Ravens game, most people think about, Sunday. But in fact, there's work you do on Monday, there's work you do on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and you just when your Monday's work's done, you shift to Tuesday. You go back, you just kind of touch on your Monday work, you just review it. On Wednesday, you do your Wednesday work and you review your Monday and Tuesday. So all that builds under the surface, so that by the time Sunday rolls around, it's like studying for an open book test. You have done the repetitions. You're not jamming. You're not cramming. You're not trying to squeeze everything in the night before the game. You just do it methodically throughout the course of the week, so you avoid becoming overwhelmed. Because what that does is it puts you in position to adapt to what happens. Monday through Saturday, everybody has their theory of what's going to happen. But the reality is on Sunday, the game always has these twists and turns that nobody predicted. In the AFC Championship game, nobody predicted that Zay Flowers would fumble the ball at the goal line. Nobody, predicted that Lamar would get sacked 4 times. Nobody predicted that Travis Kelce would have 9 catches in the first half. So all these things that you don't necessarily predict dictate the reality of the game. And your prep work is really just to put you in position to follow the course of the actual game and not the course of your expectations.
So how did this opportunity come up for you to announce games with the Ravens in 2006? I mean, you're a Maryland guy, Towson graduate. You've been with WBAL for a long time. So how did this opportunity open up with Baltimore?
So when the Ravens first came to town 28 years ago, 29 years ago now, I was going to be the play-by-play voice the first year because I had roots. The Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore. My dad was a former player for the Cleveland Browns. He was the right tackle for the Browns on all their great 50s championship teams under Paul Brown. And so it was kind of a logical fit that I was going to be the play-by-play voice. The Ravens were going to be on WBAL. And my boss told me that on a Friday. Well, nothing happened on Monday, and so Tuesday I went up to see the boss. I was like, "Hey, what's going on with this deal?" He said, "I think we lost the deal." And sure enough, it walked across the street to another station. They came in at the last minute, made a better deal. And so, Scott Garceau and Tom Matty, they did a great job for 10 years. And honestly, I thought I would never get the chance. And then one day out of the blue, I was not aware of it. The Ravens contract was up. BAL negotiated with them. BAL got the contract, and when they did, my boss came to me and said, "Look, you've been really patient, and you've been waiting for this a long time. Your time has arrived." So it just kind of fell in my lap.
That's awesome. And, you've obviously, I mean, the Ravens have been, pretty solid throughout your entire tenure. And I have to ask you about probably the pinnacle of your career, calling that Super Bowl 47 run. I mean, you think about that season, especially in the playoffs. You had Ray Lewis's last home game against the Colts. You had the double OT Mile High Miracle win in Denver. You beat the GOAT Tom Brady and the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. And then, of course, the incredible Super Bowl against the 49ers. I mean, I know it's probably hard to pick one thing, but are there a few things you kind of remember throughout that run? I think that's one of the greatest Super Bowl runs in history.
Yeah, I'll tell you the thing I remember the most isn't even what you would consider a highlight. I think the pinnacle of the entire experience for me was the 49ers have the ball. It's fourth down. I think they have the ball at the 2 or 3 yard line. It's the last play. They break the huddle. They're coming to the line of scrimmage. And I'm talking to my broadcast partner at the time, it was Stan White, and had this just total awareness that this is the last play of Ray Lewis's career on the field. One way or another, this will be the final play for Ray Lewis as a defensive player. And it will either cap an unbelievable Hall of Fame career in a euphoric celebration, or it will be a completely unfitting end to a remarkable career and it will lead to emotional desolation. There are very few times in the world of sports that this play is either going to be an emotional peak, Mount Everest, or an emotional devastation crevice that's going to take you to the bottom of the earth. And I remember the feeling of just slowly letting that moment unwind, knowing that this might be the only time you ever see a moment exactly like this, where this is it. You don't know the outcome, but you know that this is the final play and it's going to be all or nothing. And I think that's really the moment that I remember most from all of it. Ray's final ride and his running around the stadium in Baltimore was cool. The Mile High Miracle was unbelievable, and beating the Patriots and Tucker's kick, all of those things were amazing. But it was that moment before the play on the final defensive play for the Ravens in the Super Bowl that I'll always remember.
I'm curious though, how do you prepare and how do you handle that situation with the blackout? Where the electricity is out in the stadium for what 40 minutes or so, and you were talking about earlier as a broadcaster, you always have to be prepared. But here's a situation on the biggest stage in the world, arguably, you have the electricity go out, and it's something you have to deal with.
So it's not that you prepare for everything; it's that you are prepared so you can handle anything. Here's the difference. Like, my game notes are extensive, but I can promise you, I've never done. Okay, what happens if we lose electricity for 34 minutes? I wasn't prepared like that, but I had enough content that I could have talked for 34 hours. That's what I mean about the preparation. And so you just shift your play-by-play from, first and 10 balls on the 27-yard line to half of the stadium is completely in the dark here. And the coaches are huddling with the officials. And there's a definite edge of right on the cusp of, you're literally just doing play-by-play at the moment. And what makes play-by-play to me so fun is that you're narrating history exactly as it unfolds. You don't have a historian's luxury of going back and looking over the last decade or the last 3 or 4 seasons. It's literally the nose of the football, history's unfolding, and you are right there narrating it. So whether it's the lights going out in the Superdome or a great hit or a fumble at the goal line, it's the single biggest reason, Billy, that I never make predictions, because I don't ever want to make the mistake of broadcasting the game I expect to see instead of the game I actually see.
That's a great way to put it. And I wanted to ask you about a few famous Ravens, and if there's a great story you have that you can share, or maybe a moment you remember them on the field, please do. I wanted to start off with John Harbaugh. I mean, here's a guy that you have a good relationship with. I know he wrote the foreword to the book you wrote about your dad. So, any great stories, anything you can share about John Harbaugh behind the scenes or on the field?
Yeah, John's a guy I've just gotten to know so well and I have so much respect for because of his work ethic. And all the great coaches are like this. They'll tell you there's no magic to it. And the thing I love about John is that, like me, he grew up X and Oing at the kitchen table, talking with his dad, talking about culture, talking about how do you coach guys and do you coach everybody the same? And John and I have great conversations around player personalities. How do you reach this guy? And here's the thing with John that I most admire. He'll be going into his 17th season. Yeah, I'll be doing my 19th. He'll be going to his 17th. And he's not the same guy he was. He still sticks by certain great principles, team being the first and foremost, but John has adapted to the way players have changed. It's a different generation of players. When John first arrived, he was a hard-nosed guy. It was going to be his way or the highway, and here's how we're doing things. And he was trying to build a certain culture. Well, as he built that culture, he adapted. He adapted to today's players. He softened up on things like dress code on travel, but he held on to certain things like the importance of always being team first in your philosophy. And so that's the thing to me, as you watch great coaches, you watch men evolve with the game, and that's how you stay on top of the game.
That's awesome. And how about Ray Lewis? Not only, in my opinion, is he the greatest Raven of all time, but maybe one of the greatest leaders in American sports history. I mean, anything great you can share about Ray?
So I was always, fascinated with Ray's conditioning. And many years ago, there was a fitness program out there called P90X. You may have heard about it. It was very popular. And so I started to do P90X. And Tony Horton is the guy who did P90X. And it was a great program. It was one of the best workouts I've ever had. And because you watch Tony Horton day in, day out, you start to learn all his lines. And I just love this workout. So Ray comes into camp one year, and every year Ray would do something different to get himself ready. And we're doing a sit-down one-on-one interview. And, so I said, all right, so what was your one thing? What was your one thing you did totally different this year? He said, Tony Horton. I said, oh, man, you did P90X too? He goes, no, I did P90X. I flew Tony Horton in, and we worked out together all off season.
That's
That's
awesome.
when guys are at a different level than you are.
Yeah, for sure. And what about Ed Reed? I mean, I think about how lucky you are. I mean, maybe the greatest linebacker of all time and one of the greatest safeties of all time. You've had a chance to do not only Ray Lewis, but Ed Reed as well.
Yeah, Ed's a special guy because he's a unique talent. And like Ray, he just did so much film study. But the thing I'll always remember about Ed is that we both shared a very difficult tragedy in our lives. We both lost brothers. We both had brothers who died at very young ages. And mine happened, in the late 70s. Ed's happened when he was playing for the Ravens. His brother passed away. And so Ed and I were playing pool once. We're shooting an episode of Ravens Report, and we're doing it around shooting a game of pool just to make it more relaxed. And we got talking about this, and the whole story turned to the difficulty of losing your brother and the pain you go through and the challenge of dealing with it as a man and how hard it is to reach out to people. And it became this really intensely personal shared mile of I always said it's a club you never want to belong to, losing a loved one. And we both belonged to this exact same club. And it was a really powerful conversation that I'll always remember.
And I mean, obviously that's great to hear. And I mentioned maybe the greatest linebacker you've covered, maybe the greatest safety, and I think you can make a great argument, maybe the greatest kicker of all time, Justin Tucker. You mentioned his big kick in Denver in the 2012. What's it like to cover Justin Tucker on a daily basis? And man, he is something to watch as well.
Justin, look, all kickers they'll tell you they're quirky, they're unusual, they're odd, but Justin's not. I mean, he's not quirky like your typical kicker. He's not quirky like most guys are super superstitious or they're a little fragile. Justin's not. He is one of the most mentally tough human beings I've ever been around, and he understands the ability to just lock in. What makes him special is the bigger the moment, the bigger he becomes. Pressure is one of those things that, depending on how you're wired, the spotlight, the pressure, the moment, it can be a lot that guys can't handle. It can be too big for a lot of guys. It's never too big for Justin. He's always dialed in, and because he's a natural performer, he grows to the moment. And I've watched him do that throughout the course of his career. But he also has this unique ability to focus on the mechanics of the moment, on the steps, the ball, the kick. He's always super present. And I asked him his rookie year, I was doing some media coaching with the rookies, just helping them get used to being in the spotlight, talking to the media, teaching them a couple of things. And I said in an interview with him, I said, what's the best advice you ever got? And he said, oh, that's easy. That was my grandfather when I was in college. And, I like to talk. And sometimes I get a little bit of a lost focus and I get rambling around. And my grandpa looked at me and said, Justin, you're a kicker, right? Yeah, grandpa. He goes, shut up and kick the damn ball. And he said, I never forgot that advice. And so before every kick, I kind of get focused, shut up, kick the damn ball. And he's done a pretty good job with that philosophy.
Yeah, that's such a great quote. And I saved the best for last because not only is he my favorite player, he's my favorite athlete, period, right now in American sports. Lamar Jackson. I mean, what's it like to work with him on a daily basis? I think, man, he is the most electrifying player in the NFL right now.
Yeah, so Lamar is just unique. there's nothing about Lamar that is prototypical other than he changed the position of quarterback, and now you're seeing all these other teams have players who are more cut from that cloth than you would have seen 5 or 10 years ago. I'm not going to say they are Lamar Jackson because he's one of a kind, but think about Lamar's rookie year, his first MVP season, is technically his second year, 2019. The NFL had not seen the read option. College had seen it forever, but the NFL had not seen it. And so here you have this hyper athletic guy who can run, he can throw, he can move, he can elude tackles. The NFL had no idea what to do with that. It took them almost the entire season to catch up, figure it out. Well, now everybody runs the read option. Now they're running the triple option. Now they're doing all these variations off of it, and Lamar's had to grow. But the thing with Lamar that just really stands out is if you go back and look at old video of Magic Johnson when he was playing for the Lakers, the thing that made Magic special was he was always smiling. It'd be the game 7 of the NBA championship. Midway through, he's bringing the ball up court and he's smiling. He was like he was in that moment. He loved that moment. Lamar, if you look at Lamar's the same way. Lamar wants the ball in the pressure moment. He has fun. And when people talk about leaders, Lamar's not a big vocal leader. He's not a guy who delivers big pregame speeches, and he's not a guy who's going out and cussing guys out. Lamar's got more. He's more like a Peter Pan type. He's just such a unique character. He's just having fun. He's doing his thing, and guys gravitate to that. They gravitate to his unique athletic ability. They gravitate to his playmaking ability, and they gravitate to his unique knack for being able to get out of impossible situations and turn a broken play into a big play.
That's awesome, and definitely a great perspective to have. I know you touched on it earlier, but can you take me through how do you prep for a game? So let's just say it's after the previous week's game on a Sunday. What are you doing day by day to take you to be ready for Sunday? And then how does that differ, for example, when you see a team for the second time, like the Steelers, the Bengals, or the Browns?
All right, so I really don't worry so much around like whether I've seen the team or not. The only thing that changes when you've seen a team before is more of their personnel. You have to spend less time memorizing names and numbers, and you can spend more time watching the game and figuring out what they're trying to do strategically. So the game ends on Sunday. Say it's a 1 o'clock game. It ends at 4 o'clock. From 4 to 6 o'clock, I take all of the notes from that day and I condense them down into the spreadsheets that I have broken down literally for the offense, passing yards, running yards, touchdowns, penalties, all of it categorized. Break all that down. I go through each of my player note boxes, and based on Zay Flowers, did he have 8 catches for 87 yards, or did he get shut out? Has Mark Andrews scored a touchdown in 4 consecutive games? I just take all of that in that 2-hour window, and I populate everything and get it ready to start my week of preparation. Then at 6 o'clock, I go to the 6 o'clock news. Then I go shoot something for the late show, and then I head home. Monday, the first thing I do on Monday is I go through the opponent's roster and I make sure who got hurt the day before, who's likely going to be inactive, who do I need, and I start breaking it down, and I start taking the players for each position. I'll do quarterbacks and running backs, and I'll watch tape and I'll memorize names and numbers, names and numbers, names and numbers. Then I'll expand it to the wide receivers, names and numbers, names and numbers. Then I'll plug in the tight ends, names and numbers. So Monday's my offensive day where I just memorize their offense. Then I also go through there's a handful of websites that I'll read. I'll read Peter King. I'll read a couple of different writers that I like, just kind of getting updated, getting a feel for it. And then I'll go through any of the opposing team we're going to play that week. I'll look at their hometown newspaper to get the recap from their game the day before. And so that kind of gets me set for Monday. Tuesday's a defensive day. I'll start in the secondary, safeties, names and numbers. Watch the tape. Corners, names and numbers. Linebackers, names and numbers. Defensive line, names and numbers. Tuesday, the Ravens put out their official team notes, so I'll take those. I'll pull what I think is important for that to put into my note prep package. Then I go through several different websites, look for the day's news, injuries, league news. I'll make some calls. Whoever we're going to play that week, I'll call their play-by-play guy, get a sense for what's been going on, who's playing well, what are your storylines, what are your themes. Wednesday, I'll start to go back and say, okay, on offense, who if number 18 for the Rams catches the ball, am I going to know that's Puka Nacua? And anybody that I don't know, I can't say immediately, I go and I spend time, names and numbers, watching tape, watching more tape, looking at different things. And now this second time through on tape, I start to look for other identifiers than just the numbers. Does somebody have long hair? Do they always wear lime green shoes? With running backs, this is the big one. Do they have a towel that they have in their back? Because with running backs from the press box and even from television, you can't always see their number. So when they break the huddle, I got to be able to tell which running back's in the backfield, because once they have the ball, it's too late to figure it out. So Wednesday's a lot of drill down on those kind of things. And then I go through the opposing team's official game release, pull out everything of note, have my list of websites that I go through. And again, I'm building the Ravens notes, the opponent's notes. Thursday, I do the same thing with defense that I just talked about on Wednesday. And by Thursday night, I start to feel like, okay, I can breathe now. By Thursday night, I've got about an 85% grip on all of this. And the other thing I'm doing underneath is I'm writing the pregame format. I'm building the storyline to set this up in the pregame. So by Thursday night, I have the pregame format pretty much done. Friday, I figure out what are the questions I'm going to ask John Harbaugh, because by then I know the themes that have emerged. I'm just putting finishing touches on names and numbers, make sure I'm comfortable with everybody. I'm watching a lot of game tape because I want to be able to be on top of everything. I'm reading a lot of articles. I'm reading a lot of like storylines, background, and here I'm just trying to fill in things. So now I've got my flip charts, and I can see where there are holes. I don't really have much on the visiting team's tight ends, so I'll do a deep dive on them. I'll just kind of go down the rabbit hole, find out all kind of stuff. Like most of it, you never use, but every once in a while you'll come across one. So like in the AFC Championship game, I came across this one stat. I said, there's just no way this is right. And so I do a deep dive, and sure enough, it was Travis Kelce came into that game needing 7 catches to pass Jerry Rice for the most receptions in NFL playoff history. Well, then you start doing a deep dive at all the other guys who are on that list. You find some interesting stories, and that's what Friday's all about, just kind of plugging it all in. It's because you don't know what's going to pop up come Sunday. And Saturday's really just kind of a quick, relax, go through, watch a little tape, make sure you know all your numbers and names, and start talking to everybody. Like on a road trip, I'm around the coaches and the players. So that Saturday's just kind of just talking with them and getting a feel for, hey, what are you looking for this week? What do you think of this guy in the secondary? This guy looks like he's playing hurt. What have you noticed? And it's really about then taking their perspective and folding it all in. And then Sunday, you kick it off, play for 3 hours, 4 o'clock arrives, and you start preparing all over again.
That's awesome. A great perspective into how much work goes behind what you do. I'm curious, as the Ravens broadcaster, how do you describe the Ravens-Steelers rivalry? I think it's the best rivalry in the NFL.
Yeah, it's not only the best, it's the most consistent. If you look at the 49ers and the Seahawks had something going on, the Rams and the Chargers have something going on now. Different teams have them, and they're great rivalries. But the Ravens-Steelers rivalry, what has made it so powerful is it continued after Ray Lewis. It continued after Ben Roethlisberger. It continued after Terrell Suggs. And even though the Steelers did not have a great team this year, they had a great game against the Ravens in Pittsburgh, and they upset the Ravens in Pittsburgh early on. So the magic of it is 2 things. 1, the consistency. 3 things, really. 2, the duration of it. And 3, the records don't matter. Whether, I've seen these games where they played the AFC Championship. I've seen them play in week 4. I've seen it play when the Ravens had a good record. I've seen them play when the Steelers had a good record. None of it matters. It's always this intense, great game that guys just sometimes come out of the woodwork and rise to another level, because they know to be a Raven, you have to play great against the Steelers. To be a Steeler, you've got to play great against the Ravens, and everybody buys into that.
I'm curious, as someone who obviously gets to travel the NFL during the course of a regular season, what are some of your favorite places to visit on the road, whether it's the actual stadium, calling a game, the view from the press box, or even just having a chance to visit the city? Do you have a few that stand out to you in terms of, man, I really enjoy going there?
So if it's a trip west of the Mississippi, we'll leave on Friday, and that's when you get a chance to see the cities. If it's east or of the Mississippi, or Dallas or east, you just fly in the day before the game. So you land, it's 5 o'clock. The only thing you see is that you see the bus at the airport. You see whatever you see out of the bus driving to the hotel. You get to the hotel, you get some dinner, you go over your notes, you go to bed, you wake up, you're on the bus, you're at the stadium. But when they would go Fridays, I loved when the Chargers played in San Diego because that was my favorite city to visit. The weather was always great. You could go down to the beach. It was just such a cool vibe. I hate that they moved the Chargers to LA because LA is just a completely different vibe than San Diego. San Diego is just my favorite vibe. The other thing, to your point, you look for stadiums. Raiders have a really good stadium, but here's the thing you'll notice with new stadiums: the newer the stadium, the worse the broadcast booth is for radio. That's because that 50-yard line, mid-level, that's now the most expensive skyboxes. So we tend to be high up in the stadium or in the corners. So the newer the stadium, even though it's cool to see these new stadiums, like the Chargers and the Rams, SoFi, I was actually really disappointed in SoFi. We were at a high corner booth angle, which I didn't like. The audio they play is the noise. It's just deafeningly loud. I just didn't like the game experience. Dallas, you're in the corner, but they've got a great game experience, and it's pretty cool to see. Foxborough, you've got a great view. Minnesota, you're in the corner, but it's a really cool stadium. The stadium I think that's wildly underrated is the Lions' home field, Ford Field in Detroit.
Yeah.
It's this old warehouse that they renovated. They have the skyboxes all on one side, the seats on the other side. Good angle. Trying to think some of the other ones. Seattle's got a great stadium. I like to visit that one. Seattle's cool because they've got the best press box food. They have sushi. They're not schlubbing off with hot dogs and nachos and crap food. They're giving you sushi in Seattle. I'll go there anytime to have that kind of food. And that's the stuff you look for on the road. And then the other thing is you get to be friends with different broadcasters. So, the guys in your division you see a couple times a year, and that's enjoyable. But then there's certain guys like Mike Keith with the Tennessee Titans is a good friend of mine. We only see each other every so often. But when we do, it's just great to get together and just catch up on families and what's going on with your team and how's life treating you. Those are the things you really look to as far as being a broadcaster on the road.
That's awesome. And I wanted to get away from the broadcast booth for a second, Jerry. In preparation for this interview, I was watching a few of your clips on YouTube, and I came across the ESPN mini interview that you had put up about what it's been like to live with the same name as the disgraced former Penn State coach, Gerry Sandusky. I'm curious, obviously, because I'm sure you've gotten, all kinds of insults in the past. What is it like now, and has it died down a little bit now that we're further away from the scandal?
Like all things, it dies down. But, I'm surprised that here we are like 12 years later, it hasn't died down as much as you would think. If I go outside of Baltimore and introduce myself, I call it the Sandusky flinch. I'll go to shake somebody's hand. Hey, Gerry Sandusky. And they're like, what? They'll visibly flinch for a second. And then I just break out my mantra, Jerry with a G, no relation. Boom, drop the mic. And that kind of calms people down a little bit. But it's one of those things that I'm going to have to live with probably the rest of my life. And I always equate it like, think, Billy, what do your parents do for a living?
My dad's a software engineer. My mom's a bank teller.
Perfect. So just imagine if instead of your name, your dad was a software engineer and his name was Bernie Madoff. Every time he told somebody about some new code he wrote, and they say, "Oh, who wrote this?" Bernie Madoff. They say, "Bernie Madoff, what?" And it just wouldn't go away. And this is kind of like that. The rest of my career, I know I'm going to have to deal with the flinch. It's just part of the fluky territory.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to put it. I was curious. I wanted to ask you about your dad. I mean, obviously, I know you had a great relationship with him. You wrote a book about him. How much has he meant to you? Obviously, not just personally, but your career. And I'm curious, as a side to that, did he have any great stories about Super Bowl V? Because I was reading up about that game. That was a messy game. The Colts finally win their Super Bowl that they missed in Super Bowl III. So, what was how much has he meant to you? And any great stories he ever told you about Super Bowl V?
Yeah, he means to this day a great deal to me because one of the things I miss so much. My dad died the year I got the Ravens job, so it was 18 years ago now. And one of the last things I actually told my dad was, "Hey, Dad, I made it to the NFL too." Very powerful. I miss X and Oing with him. My dad was one of the greatest football teachers I was ever had the pleasure to be around. He could watch a game and get a notepad out, the pen. He'd show, like, here's what they're doing. They're shifting here. They're playing on under defense. They're coming over here. They're trying to pressure. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to set up this for the third quarter. Maybe it was like watching a chess master. When you watch football with my dad, you just understood things at a level that the average fan, the average broadcaster can never ever access. And I miss that so much. The thing about Super Bowl V that I remember with my dad was It's only 2 years removed from Super Bowl III. And he was on the Colts coaching staff in Super Bowl III when they lose this biggest upset in NFL history. And so Super Bowl V, they were looking to as kind of like the make good, like, okay, we're going to clean, we're doing this right. Well, they go to Super Bowl V, and it was such a hard-hitting game. There's turnovers galore. There's tipped passes. There's fumbles. There's just, they called it the Blunder Bowl, which was super insulting. So they finally win the Super Bowl, and they come away, and people are like saying, that was a crappy game. That was a Blunder Bowl. And everybody with the Colts kind of felt like they never really got their chance to make good for the loss in Super Bowl III. But what I really remember is something my mom said many years later. She said the most depressed she ever saw my dad. My dad was not a guy who was inclined to depression or anything, but like just the most down she ever saw him up to that point in their life was the day after Super Bowl V. To which I said, why? Why wouldn't he be on top of the world? He said he woke up the next day and looked at me and said, well, we've just done everything we ever wanted to do. What do we do now? Like that you made it to the top of the mountain. And he would coach in 2 more Super Bowls with the Miami Dolphins, Super Bowl 17 and 19, and he lost them both. So he had the unbelievable privilege of coaching in 4 Super Bowls, but only won 1. And I'll tell you what I learned in watching that. If you're going to lose before the Super Bowl, because nothing stings like losing a Super Bowl.
For sure. And I was reading too. I mean, I saw this quote from a longtime New York Giants general manager that your dad, he called him the greatest coach in the history of the league that never got a chance. I mean, that's a pretty good compliment for your dad to have that kind of a quote attached to him.
Yeah, that was I think it was Ernie Corsi who said that, and Ernie worked with my dad for many years. My dad was a unique talent. He wasn't just a great offensive line coach. He was a great leader of men. He was a great talent evaluator. He understood the physiology of the game. He understood the psychology of the game. And what hurt him was in Baltimore in this 2 years, a year and a half after Super Bowl V, Robert Irsay buys the team, brings in Joe Thomas as the general manager. And after week 5, they fired the head coach, Don McCafferty, and they made my dad the interim head coach. And in hindsight, the one thing you really don't want to become in the NFL is an interim head coach. And the reason for that is you're going to get fired at the end of the season. Very few interim coaches stick. Most of them get fired. And once you get fired, you almost never get back in the interview cycle for a head coaching job. And so by the time people are thinking highly of you again, you're in your 60s, and there's not a lot of guys in their 60s who get a shot at a head coaching job. So my dad just never really got the shot that he always deserved. It didn't come his way. He wasn't bitter about it. He loved football. He loved the NFL. He loved his career. And he was happy with the way it unfolded. But as a son, you want to see great things come for your dad. And what I really saw was he took what came his way and he made the most of it. He focused on the things he could control, and he just didn't bog down on the things he couldn't control.
That's awesome. And Jerry, you've been so gracious with your time. I have 2 final questions for you. My first is, what's your advice to aspiring sportscasters like me? I mean, you know better than anyone. You're a veteran in this business. It's a competitive business. It can take a long time to get to where you need to go and where you want to go. So what's your advice to young guys and girls like me who want to get in this field?
So a couple things. Be patient. I told you, I thought I was the voice of the Ravens, and then I had to wait 10 years for that opportunity to come again. So be patient. Fall in love with language. I meet a million people who say, oh, my son wants to be a sportscaster. My daughter wants to be a sportscaster. She knows so much about sports. She knows all the stats. Honestly, don't worry about the stats. The stats, everybody has access to the stats. Learn how to tell stories. Sports is nothing more than literature in full contact. It's the journey of the protagonist wrestling against the antagonist. It's somebody who's trying to overcome obstacles to achieve a goal. It's dealing with adversaries who are trying to prevent them from happening. That's what it's storytelling. Learn the art of storytelling. Learn language. Fall in love with language. And don't fall in love with language to impress everybody with your SAT vocabulary. Fall in love with language so that you can use it as a tool to tell stories that bring people in and give them what they're looking for, which is the escape from their everyday life. For 3 hours in a stadium, people want to believe that that's the most important thing in the world, whether it is or not. And as a broadcaster, part of your job is to create that storyline so that for 3 hours you give people a complete break from their life, for whatever that life might be, so that they can immerse themselves in a story. That's what take as many English classes as possible, take as many writing classes as possible, take a film class, take a storytelling class, learn the art of language and use language to tell stories. If you can do that, what you find is the sports change, the rules change, but storytelling never changes.
That's a great piece of advice there. And Gerry, my final question for you is: as you reflect on your career, are you pretty content with the way it's played out? I mean, you've called the Ravens games now for a long time. You called the Super Bowl championship. You're a Super Bowl champion broadcaster. You've been at WBAL for many years. So, as you look back on your career, is there anything you wish you could have done, or all being said, you're pretty content with the way it's played out?
Look, I'm very happy with the way it's played out because I've had an amazingly long run in Baltimore, and I've been very fortunate to be with a great organization like the Ravens, and to be the voice of the Ravens. Those were dream jobs that I had as a kid. I guess the one goal that I had as a kid that didn't quite come to fruition was to do network play-by-play. I think if you are in this business, we all want to strive to the top level, and in this business, that would be network. And I was really, really close. I was actually, in conversations with the network about a job, but those talks literally coincided with the breaking news of former Penn State coach Gerry Sandusky. And they came back and said, look, we're still happy to talk to you and pursue this, but you're going to have to change your name to work at the network. So I simply said, well, then I guess I won't be working at the network because this is the name I was given and this is the name I'll pass on. And I'm not trading my name. And so even though I didn't get my dream job, what I did learn in life, Billy, and I'll leave you with this, is that success isn't just what you're willing to do to achieve it. It's also what you're not willing to do.
Wow, that's certainly a great piece of advice to end there. Gerry, this has been such a pleasure getting to talk to you. Thank you so much. It's been so fun getting to hear about your career and all the great stories you have and the piece of advice that you have. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I really hope that you get to call Ravens Super Bowl championship here soon.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And it's been great talking with you. Great get to know you. And I'll share for your listeners something that Billy did. I can encourage you to keep doing. You've probably asked a bunch of people for interviews, and I could have easily said no. And you know what? Who cares? You got a yes. And we had this great conversation. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask. The worst that can happen is they'll say no. Maybe they ignore you. The best that can happen is, hey, you make a new friend like we did today.
Perfect. That's a great way to put it. Thank you so much to Gerry Sandusky, the longtime voice of the Ravens and also sports director at WBAL TV, for joining me on the latest edition of The Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.